So the title of this talk is Living into the Questions. And this comes from a Rainer Maria Rilke quote that I will read to you later. And this theme of living into the questions arose for me sometime in January, with the chaos of the world and this country. I went onto social media, and it's because of moments like this that I don't get rid of social media. Like a few times in my life, I have gone onto Instagram and there's been some kind of little video from some teacher or some person somewhere that has been life shifting. And because of that, I can't get rid of the dang thing, even though the other 99.9% of the time it's soul sucking. So living into that question, how to navigate that. So this particular day was it was really kind of magical because it was the first video that popped up and the last one that I looked at that day, first and last. And it was Lama Rod Owens. Do any of you know the teacher Lama Rod Owens? Yeah, he's a teacher in the Tibetan tradition. He's a self-identified, he calls himself what does he call himself? A black queen from Georgia or something like that. How does he describe what? Fat black queer queen. He's got a lot. Yeah, there's a lot. Fat black queer queen from Georgia. And he is his own person in the Dharma. And there's something about that has always really inspired me. Even though he comes from the Tibetan tradition, he beats to the drum of his own heart, and it's inspiring for me. But in this video, he was pretty serious, and he just kind of was like, I felt like just speaking directly to me. And he said, if you are a spiritual teacher or consider yourself to be a spiritual teacher or lead any kind of yoga class or anything spiritual for other people, you better be telling people how you feel about what's happening politically right now. You better make sure they all know your stance on what's happening. That's my paraphrasing of how he said it, but some version of that. And he talked more about it. And that was just, it was that kind of, am I? Do people know how I feel about what's happening in the world? But it brought a cascade of questions, and a waterfall of questions that I think I had already been living into for a while, but it just all culminated, and with all of the violence that is happening all around us, it became these questions that am I doing enough? What am I doing? How do I know when it's enough? What's my message? What does the Buddha say about all of the suffering that we have available to our understanding? Like, obviously we know in an intellectual way there's suffering in the world, but what about the extreme amount of images from everywhere, and what does engagement look like in the face of all of that? And I felt like I didn't know what the Buddha had to say about that. I felt like I really knew what the Buddha had to say or has to say about how we can free ourselves from suffering and how to be with the suffering of those, like, in the room together, in our communities together. But the whole thing, I haven't yet heard the message from the Buddha. And I didn't know if I just hadn't heard it yet or what. And I don't know if I felt confused, but I felt lost. I felt really lost. I felt I had more questions. I felt I just had questions and I didn't have answers. And it was very uncomfortable for me as someone who's holding space for groups every single day, with all of us coming in and experiencing the chaos of this government and the violence in the world. And I just felt, I don't know what to say anymore. And it was very uncomfortable. And so something that I also learned while studying from Lama Rod, and this is just part of his own invitation, a practice invitation. I can remember him saying, y'all are not asking for help enough. And he wasn't talking about asking each other for help, but that's included. He's talking about asking ancestors, asking the sky, asking God, asking the Dharma, asking your own heart, whatever. But all of those things he's speaking to. You're not, and his deal is asking the ancestors. He's really connected to that kind of practice. But just you're not asking, you're not doing that gesture of help me, please. And so in my studies with him over these last couple of years, it's been a practice that I do more and more when I can remember. And mostly it arises when I'm feeling lost or confused, or I don't know the way forward, or I don't know the answer, or I don't understand something. And so that particular day, right after watching that little video, I was supposed to make a whole host of videos for this one organization I worked for. So that was kind of where the inner conflict was coming. Like I had to make all these videos for people, these Buddhist teachings, and I didn't know what to say. So I set that down and I just went for a walk. I walked down, I went to Oaks Bottom and just walked. And it was one of these sunny days that we've been having. And it just was like, okay, sky, Lama Rod, ancestors, God, whatever, Dharma, please help me know what to say. Please help me know. Please help me right now. And so I just walked and asked, and that's all. And nothing happened. I had a great walk. Let's say nothing happened. Something happened. A couple of things happened, and that's what I want to talk about. But one of the things that was interesting is that when I was just asking, I was no longer trying to figure anything out. I think I'm going to say more about it in a minute, but that's for me what happens when I ask, is I get down out of here to trying to figure my way out of it. And I just open and look around, come into the present moment. And one of the things that I saw in the present moment was a great blue heron, which for me is a very meaningful thing to see. I have a very strong spiritual connection with that bird. And it was doing something I had never seen a heron do before, which was sleep. Have you ever seen a heron sitting in a tree asleep? And I took all the pictures of it, and then I just stopped and I was like, okay, what's the message here? I was like, maybe I need to take a nap. As I walked, I realized maybe the message is rest, the mind, rest a little. You get to decide what the meaning is, right? Or you get to have a conversation with that moment and see what the heart resonates with. And that whole walk just reminded me of this quote from Rilke, and I'm going to read it to you now. And the cool thing about this talk I'm giving is that I really have no answers. It's all a talk of questions, which is so much easier. Okay. And I had really only known part of this quote, which was something like, live into the questions. Someday you'll have the answers, some version of that, living into the questions. But that's like the phrase that always stuck out to me. Ooh, live into the questions. What does that mean? That sounds exciting. And when I went to this, so this is Letters to a Young Poet, and it is Joanna Macy and Anita Barrow's translation. And the writing is so small. The whole quote is so beautiful and deep. I'm going to read parts of it. So Rilke is writing to a young poet who has deep questions. Yeah. And he says, I feel that no person has an answer for the questions and feelings arising from deep within you. For when addressing the most delicate and nearly unsayable, words fail, even the best. But I believe, nevertheless, that you need not remain without help. Everything will become easier once you hold to nature, to the simple and insignificant, truly seen by few. I ask you, have patience with all that is unresolved in your heart and try to love the questions themselves, like closed rooms, like books written in a foreign language. Don't try to find the answers now. They cannot be given anyway because you would not be able to live them. For everything is to be lived. Live the questions now. Perhaps you then may gradually, without noticing, one day in the future, live into the answers. Perhaps you bear within yourself the capacity to imagine and shape a sacred way of life. Prepare yourself for that. Trust what comes to you. What a deep guy. What a deep Dharma guy. And there's just some parts, so many parts of this that I just discovered just this week that even spoke to me more, like prepare yourself for that. Prepare yourself. Imagine and shape a sacred way of life. Prepare yourself for that. And that just actually, while I was reading it, just now jumped out at me. It's like, yeah, that's what we're doing. We just diligently come to this practice where often it feels like nothing at all is happening. We have our Dharma conversations, but we're preparing ourselves for the openings. We ask these questions, kind of lean back, see what arises over time, how to think, how is the world teaching us or revealing the answers? Living into the questions prepares us. Asking the questions over and over prepares us. And then trust what comes to you. I could so easily not trust that great blue heron had any kind of message that was important. My rational mind wants to say things like that. Oh, just because you saw your most sacred bird and it was sleeping doesn't mean anything, you know. I could trust that my stopping and seeing that bird when it took my breath away and brought me into complete presence with a deep feeling in my heart. I could trust that. That's life talking to me, revealing some of the answers. So I shared some of these, some of the deeper questions that I was really living into and not feeling like I knew the answer to, which is like, how can I help? Am I doing enough? What is my work? How do we know when to step in? How do I know when to go on retreat? How do I know when it's time to be generous with others? How do I know when it's time to be generous with myself? Do I need to know everything that is happening in the world? What is the place of joy, worldly joy even? And another question that I was deeply living into just personally as an artist was, does art have any place in the path of awakening? And that was when I really couldn't find the answer to. And each of them I could like give an answer to, but they weren't satisfying. They weren't like soul, heart, knowing answers. They were like, I could create kind of answers in the mind, but they weren't satisfying. And I just want to pause and just pass the mic around a little and hear, do you have any big questions you're living into right now? Just so we can live into them together and we won't have a discussion about it. I'm not going to say anything about your question. It's just so we could hear some of the questions together that you are living into that you don't have the answer to right now. You can just raise your hand if you want to share.
For the sake of folks on Zoom, try to keep the mic close to your mouth.
How do I heal, and what does healing look like?
Yeah. Beautiful question.
How do we act quickly enough with discernment?
How do I make the best use of the energy that I have?
Yeah.
How do I be present with violence against me, and should I be peaceful with that?
How do I fully manifest my purpose?
How much do I say yes to, and how much do I say no to, while trying to manage other people's needs as well as my own?
What's the point? I mean,
Right. Are there any on Zoom? Any at home on Zoom? You want to bring your voice into the space? No. Okay. And I'm sure, some of us are like really do not want to speak in the space, but I'm sure if we pass the mic and had everyone share, there would be a question. Probably each one of us could speak into the space. I'm guessing that to be true. And if you don't, come see me after, because I want to know what's going on. Maybe you have the answers. Yeah.
This is coming from somebody online. It says, here's a tough one. How to move through the world when we have so many sadists around us who enjoy the opportunity to hurt others.
Yeah. I'm so glad I don't have to answer any. This is like the best kind of Q&A. Let's just ask the questions. So then the question is, what does it mean to live into a question? That is a question that we can live into also. And I'll try to give some answers to this one. Or not answers, but I'll try to share how I do it. Yeah, it's not an answer really, just share what this exploration has been and is for me these days. And for me, quite honestly, I have two styles of living into questions. And one is more dharmic and one is more woo. Woo. And they're both equally potent for me. So the dharmic sort of what living into the questions. So often when a question, like all of these beautiful, deep questions that were brought into the space and like important questions that like, actually, we really do hope that we can find the answers to these. Like, so living into the questions isn't like asking a question and then shutting the book. I don't know. Yeah. Daesan Sunim, a Zen teacher, talks about don't know mind. But don't know mind is not closing the book. It's opening the book. Like that line from the Rilke, the questions like a book written in a foreign language. What's it say? What's it say? I don't know. So this I don't know mind. Okay, is opening. And so what usually happens when we're trying to figure out the answer is that it's rooted in craving. I have to figure this out. I have to know. We want the answer. We want maybe the certainty the answer will bring us. All the things that answers give us, the pleasant feeling that we get when we have an answer or know what we're supposed to do. So that's rooted in craving. And we know from the Dharma that the craving is the cause of all suffering. So if we're asking questions rooted in craving, we're going to feel stressed out. We're going to be suffering. And another kind of craving that can be, not necessarily all the time, but one that I see.
Come on.
Okay. Thank you, JJ. So one of the other kinds of craving that might not be there all the time when we ask the question, but a lot of times it's there, I can see it's there, is the craving to be the one who knows. So not just to have the answer, but what does it mean about me if I have the answer? To be the one, that some identity is also being created in the knowing of the answer, which is also quite painful if you've ever experienced that. So when we can reside in that don't know mind, like opening the book, instead of shutting the heart, which is what happens when there's any kind of craving, the whole heart shuts down, the whole mind shuts down in that grasping gesture, the opposite happens. We let go of the craving, actually. And so there is a release that we feel too, when just we live into the questions, like without the pressure of needing the craving to be fulfilled. So when the heart is open, like just what we did with the Dalton and the Daltones, like the giving and receiving, like we open, we're ready to receive. And that's where things get woo for me and get in the best possible way. That's where things get very mysterious. And I think in some ways the Dharma is very mysterious. Life is mysterious, you know, if we want it to be, if we want to open to that. So before I get into the woo, I want to, this is a pretty woo moment, by the way, does everybody know what I mean when I say woo woo? Is that like a term we all sort of know? More, I don't even know. How would we define it? Woo woo. Yeah, maybe like, yeah. Hippie spirituality or like, I'm going to say God. I know that's a troublesome word. Yeah, what we can't see, what we can't prove, what we can't know with the rational mind, maybe. The Buddha was very rational. Like there's a lot of rationale, which is why I think most of us love it. It makes sense. But even the Dharma is pretty, there's a lot that cannot be seen or explained. They're called the imponderables. So the woo is woven right in there. So anyway, woo woo moment. When I was just walking around thinking about this talk, I picked just randomly this book off my desk, which is one of my favorite books because there's not a lot of reading involved. The Awakening Heart, just these little pith teachings. It was not dog-eared, by the way, at the time. And I just opened to this little teaching. Each time you ask yourself, what is the nature of mind? Do not then jump in immediately with a conceptual, prefabricated answer, but leave a gap. This is very important, to ask the question and then leave the mind be. Trust what you receive, right? So I'm just going to, and I will, for you who have been in Women's Sangha, you have heard me talk about this every week because it was something very big that happened to me. And this happened to me, or happened through me, happened with me, just like the day after after I heard Lama Rod's talk and went into the forest to Oaks Bottom, is that I was just deciding on a Friday night what to do. And so I looked at Apple TV and it was actually very, very late at night. I don't know even why I would consider watching a movie at like 10 o'clock at night. I guess I was just open to receiving what needed to come my way. And I landed on this documentary that probably many of you have seen, and it's called Come See Me in the Good Light. Have you seen it? Has anybody seen it? It is so good, right? Those of you who've seen it. I really hope that we can watch it together in here sometime. It is a documentary on that follows a year before the poet Andrea Gibson died, and they were a poet laureate of Colorado. So this movie is it's a glimpse into their life after getting a terminal cancer diagnosis. It's also a love story between them and their wife. It's like so tender and just so beautiful. It's also about death. It's also about living. And when I watched it, just something really strong was happening in my heart. I was literally weeping pretty much the whole movie. And it wasn't out of sadness. It was that weeping that happens when like some truth is touched. Have you know that experience? And it lasted for days and days. This was happening. And something was happening to me, and I couldn't explain it, but I could feel it. And I was trying to figure out what it was that was happening to me. What was this experience? And so from the day that I watched the movie and every day after, I have read every single poem of theirs, and I have listened to every podcast that I could possibly find to try to understand what my connection with this person was. And finally, I landed upon this documentary or this podcast with Andrea Gibson and Tammy Simon, who is the person who runs Sounds True. And Tammy got to the heart of it. And she said, it seems to me, Andrea, that when you got your terminal cancer diagnosis, you had an awakening. I was like, yes, that's what I was feeling the whole time. And Andrea wouldn't say, yes, I had an awakening, or no, they didn't even speak to that. They said, all I can tell you is that my whole life I had been filled with anxiety attacks, panic attacks. Planes have had to turn around for me to get off. They were a spoken word poet. And they said every time they got on stage, they would shake out of fear every single time. And they're quite famous. They traveled the world doing spoken word poetry. So just to tell you the level of fear. And they also said they were hypochondriac ever since they were a little child, and that their mother used to write on the refrigerator every symptom that they thought they had, just to say it can't possibly be all of that. And they said, and I was afraid my whole life that I would have cancer. And somehow I was afraid I would get it when I was 45, and they did. And they said, but the moment I got the terminal cancer diagnosis, fear completely went away. And they said for a whole year that they were in complete bliss and undergoing chemo, and in complete bliss. They said, I knew that I was loved. And they also had many suicide attempts. I don't know how many, but they had suicidal ideation in their life and suicide attempts. And they said, I never knew that I was loved. And at that moment, I just knew I was loved, and that we all are loved. And that actually we don't have to love ourselves because we're already loved. It's just that there's all this stuff blocking it. And for me, I have had a moment like that in my own life and in my own practice, coming out of or in the midst of a dark night of the soul. Already had a strong practice, already was a teacher, was going through a really, really dark time of self-hatred. And I had a similar experience to her. And it went and it lasted too for a whole year. I thought nothing could touch me. All the stories about not good enough were completely ripped out of me. And I thought, holy shit, am I awakened? Nothing could touch me anymore. I knew I wasn't, but it was strange, the amount of love and freedom that I felt. And after a year, my own experience, it just sort of went away. I could find it again. Watching Andrea's movie helped me find it again. And it woke it back up in me, and it was so powerful. And just to say, in this interview with Tammy Simon, Tammy asked the question, well, what happened after a year? You were in this bliss, you were in this awakening experience. What happened after a year? And they said nothing in particular, just, politics and friends. I had a friend dying, nothing really that they could name, but they said, it just started to shift more, and the heart could contract more easily again. It would get covered up. And I never had a practice before I got my cancer diagnosis. I was dabbling in spirituality, but after that, I developed a practice, and I developed, they call it a keychain. They developed a keychain of 12 keys that would unlock their heart or open their heart. In our women's sangha this week, we started making our own keychains, and it's a cool practice. Maybe I'll say more about that later. But so that was just, I want to say I was open to receiving that. And not only did it remind me of my own moment when I knew I was loved, when I knew so strongly, when I felt all of those stories completely gone, it reminded me of that, and it brought it back for me in a really helpful way. And there were also pieces of this person's life that started, of Andrea Gibson's life, and the way that they worked with their art and their message, that were the answers I was looking for. It felt like God, and I too don't really use that word, but I don't know what else to call it. That I have a teacher, Rob Burbea, he's a Buddhist teacher, and he would call it like divine intelligence with the world soul. Yeah, that. Or like the soul of the Dharma, like the divine soul of the Dharma, or my own awakened heart, or whatever you want to call it. But it was something that felt like more than me. And I felt like I was now having a conversation with not just the voices in my head that are trying to make sense of everything, but with the voices of life, really. And so much has been revealed to me. So much helpful information about my own, all of those questions I read to you. I still don't feel like I have the answers, but I have some more helpful ideas. Still living into these questions. And so for me, the question, just like Andrea said, that they developed this keychain, and I will share some of their keychains. The question is then just how to stay open. For me, this is my question: how to stay open to having this conversation with life, with my own heart, with the Sangha around me, with the trees, with the animals, with this whole world. It's like we're all here together to help us figure out how to live this life, to live a life of generosity and wisdom and love. Like that's celebrating Sangha. It's like we're here together, living into these questions together. And it was such a profound, once I was, after listening to that talk with Tammy and Andrea Gibson, I was like, their awakening woke me up again. This is what we're doing for each other, y'all, in Sangha. Let's wake each other up. We're here to do that with each other. And it's not just here, Sangha, in this room, but yes, particularly with people who care about the things we care about. Particular people who are really interested in having conversations that uplift each other versus bringing us down or making us feel more afraid or more full of rage. So yes to this particular Sangha and the other Sanghas that you're in. So unfortunately, Andrea didn't talk about all 12 keys that they use that were reliable keys to open their heart, but the two that it's just worth sharing, I can only remember. They said 3, I can only remember 2. One is, like if their heart was closing in relationship to another person, do I think I know everything about this person right now? And when they would ask that question, they would realize, no, yes, I do think I know everything about this person. And of course I don't. And that again, the contracted mind that's locked in a view, an identity of the other person would open. Their heart would open with curiosity. Things would change. And the other one that they talked about was they go looking for fear. If their heart is closed, they say, okay, what am I afraid of right now? Let me go look for it. Because often our heart is closed. We're afraid of something that we don't want to feel, right? And it's like, no, I'm good, but there it is. Like it's back there in the corner and it's really there. Actually, I'm filled with anxiety right now. No, but I'm totally good. Like, this happens. Does it happen to you? Happens to me, but you have a sense it's there, back there. Let me go looking for it. So I just thought I'd share, so this is one way that we live into questions, like these big questions, kind of just dropping them in. And like what's his name? Jam Yang Temphel, like drop the question in, don't figure it out, open, wait. But there's so many different ways to work with questions in the practice. And the way that Andrea was talking about working with questions is like bringing them into the present moment to help us free contraction in the moment. And so I've been leading groups all week and doing a practice of relating this to the way the Buddha really offered the same teaching in the 4 foundations of mindfulness. It's right there in the 4th foundation. Know if there's a hindrance there or not. And the 5 hindrances: aversion, wanting, restlessness and worry, the dullness of the mind that doesn't really care about being aware, and then doubt. So this is the 4th foundation. Know if there's a hindrance there or not. Basically, that's another way of saying know if the heart is locked, heart is closed, or not free. And it's probably one of those that's here. And each one of those hindrances has a lot to say. So they create all of these stories in the mind when they're there. When aversion is there, it's telling all the stories about what's wrong and why you're so valid in believing that it's wrong. When doubt is there, it's telling all the stories about how horrible you are and how you don't belong doing this or that, and it's all very believable. When craving is there, it's telling the story about why you need this thing or why you need this person to do it just that way or why it has to go this way. Why I have to plan this over and over and over and over again in my mind during this meditation. It just does that. That's what the hindrances do. It's their job. They just tell the stories. What's the story that restlessness and worry? What if this happens? What if that doesn't happen? What if stories? The sloth and torpor. This doesn't really matter. What's the point of it? I don't care. Mostly that's the story it tells. And then we just kind of check out, right? Or it's good, it's all good, everything's good. So the Buddha said, look, see if these are here. So, and memorize. I have a teacher who says, memorize these, know them so that you can know that they're there. And then right next to this list in the 4th foundation of mindfulness is know if there are any awakening factors present. And these are mindfulness, investigation, which is this quality too of curiosity that I've been talking about so much, that arises very naturally when we can rest in that don't know, when we can relax into that. Curiosity naturally arises. So this is an awakening factor. Energy, joy, I'm just naming them: tranquility, samadhi, and equanimity. So these are the Buddha's keys that he's offering us. And there are many more wholesome, beautiful qualities of mind that we can invite in that can unlock things like patience, the Brahmaviharas, the heart qualities, many, many, many. So that's kind of like the Buddha's way of saying, here's your keychain, go unlock the hindrances. But I think it's also cool to come up with our own set of questions, really, that we can ask ourselves, that we can ask ourselves in the moment, that we can live into the moment. And I thought I'd share some of mine that are really my go-tos, that have really become very, very reliable questions, if I can remember to ask them. And that's just the key. That's one of the keys, mindfulness. Can I remember what I want, right? Can I remember I don't want to be run by a hindrance right now? So some of mine are, how is this my curriculum? That's the one that's the most reliable for me. That's the one I sort of live my life by when I don't like what's happening. Mostly when I don't like what's happening is when I ask this. What about this is my curriculum? Which is another way of saying, how can I wake up? How can I use what's in front of me to wake up right now? That's changed my life, that key. That comes from Ram Dass. It's a Ram Dass teaching. Another way that I might ask it is there anything sacred or meaningful about what's happening right now? What am I believing is true about life right now? And usually that one will help me to see that I'm in an unwise view. If wise view in Buddhism is understanding that things are always changing, not personal, knowing what is causing suffering or not, or leading to the end of the suffering. When I ask myself, what am I believing is true about life right now? I'll usually see that I'm in an unwise view. I'm believing this thing is going to be here forever. I'm believing it's my fault that it's here, right? And so that one helps bring me to checking the view. What's the view right now? What am I afraid of feeling right now? Or what am I unwilling to feel? Here's one that when it works, it really works very deeply. Am I aware that I am alive and that the time of my death is uncertain? That works when I am like, wake up in a funk and I don't know what I want to do with my day. And I'm just like, I don't know what to do. I'll drop that one in then. And it changes the moment for me. Does this feel permanent? Am I taking this personally? Am I afraid of not being perfect? And this is one I've been using more and more lately. How would love say that if I hear doubt in the mind or something that doesn't feel so good? How would love say that? Or what would love say? So circle back to my original question of like not knowing what the Buddha had to say about how to hold all of this suffering that we are hearing, knowing about right now. One of the ways that I listened was to open an email this week that came from one of the resident scholar, Sutta scholar from Spirit Rock. He's this young, cool guy, Sean Fayette Oaks. And you can, I'm on his newsletter, so I get his newsletter. In this newsletter, he spoke directly to this question. And he said, the Buddha didn't talk about what he said, there aren't any suttas where the Buddha talks about what to do about knowing about so much, how to hold the knowing of it and how to hold what we're supposed to do about helping. There's no suttas about that. We have suttas about compassion and loving kindness, and part of the Eightfold Path is wise action and alleviating suffering. But what do we do about knowing about all of everything and seeing the images of all of everything? Even though the Buddha himself was said to be omniscient, so could know that. At the time of the Buddha, they didn't have that access to knowing. They just knew what was happening in their village, in their community. So this is a question we get to live into together as a Sangha. So I just invite this, maybe even we go back there, and as we're chomping on the goodies, we can start having bringing some of these questions in. And I know we already are. I mean, I think most people are already asking these questions with each other, but that's what I needed to hear, that I wasn't missing something, that I wasn't like, and it came right into my email. I was like, oh, ready to open and receive that as a Sangha, as a world Sangha, life is revealing what we need. I might not have read that email. Why did I read that email? I don't read every newsletter that comes into my inbox. I did that day though. You know, it's like trusting what comes. And so it's a great email. Sean gives a lot of great ideas about, you know, his thoughts around holding that. But I would invite us to just live into these questions like, what is engagement like for you these days? How do you know when your generosity feels like enough or not enough? What blocks your generosity? What supports opening it or sparkling it up? What blocks your metta? You know, these are just these deep questions that we can co-create how we want to relate to what's happening in the world in a way that we can feel balanced, empowered, that we have the resources to wake up ourselves, to do our own practice. And that, how do you know when it's time just to like let the world go? This is called renunciation. How do you know I'm enough? I'm going on retreat. You know. Yeah. How do you know when you're in balance? Who's your favorite Bridgerton couple? What's going to happen in the next 4 episodes? The first couple was my favorite couple. Yeah.